A couple years ago, I started my morning by listening to an Entree Leadership podcast, and that is where I met my guest today, Mr. Clay Scroggins. And I thought to myself, I hope one day you get to meet this guy. And
One day, your wildest dreams might come true.
And a couple years later, I've got to know him, and we have him here today. So, Clay Scroggins, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, Hampton. Love that you're doing this. I meant to ask you beforehand. This is probably not something you're supposed to ask on air, but do you do anything with the video?
Typically, but I think you look great. I mean,
great. Okay. I just didn't know how. Sometimes I get real free. I've got this microphone that I walk around with, and sometimes but I'll try to stay locked in frame.
You have a no. You have look. You're a pastor. Like, you have a preaching background. Start moving around. I'm okay with that. I like that. Well, so the first thing I heard about Clay was on the Entree Leadership podcast, and you were talking about your book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, which happens to be right here if you're watching this.
You're so brilliant the way you position that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's got to be there. I mean, for anyone listening, if you're talking to someone older than you that you want to learn from, and if they've written a book and you don't have it, then that's just a bad look. You got to get the book. So we have the book right here, but that's lesson number one. But one thing that I've noticed, let me paint this picture, and maybe some things that you've written in the book could be helpful. Here's something I've experienced, and I think a lot of my friends are in this group. Mm-hmm. You grow up, you're in like middle school, high school, college. Maybe you serve in SGA, you're a part of your youth group, you're a captain on your sports team. You get to college, you serve in your sorority, your fraternity, and your campus ministry, and then you graduate and you become an accountant. And shout out Mr. Adam Tarnow. Go listen to that podcast with the three of us. But
I think all the CPAs out there working for Deloitte today or wherever you are.
And you don't have to be an accountant, but one thing I've seen is I've almost seen people who maybe haven't been taught a lot about leadership. Like me, for example, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was given a lot of opportunities to formally lead for my whole life. And then you graduate college and you start your first job, and you're probably a couple years at best away from having a formal leadership title.
Yeah, good way to put it. Yeah.
And so I just see a few people, maybe they just accept, well, this is the way it is. I'm not a leader. I don't have a title. And someone that was so ambitious and excited about influencing, impacting people, it just maybe kind of drifts away. And I don't know. So I think that your book may have a few things to say about that. Have you seen or heard that story before?
Hampton, this is bizarre that you painted it that way, because I'm not messing with you. When I first started writing, I did one of those psychographic exercises that someone recommended. They were like, "Hey," I think it was like a map that you kind of filled out where you answer all these questions about who you're writing to. And I built this character that I called Eager Evan, and he is the person you just described. The way I would put it, I mean, at the time I was working, I've been a pastor my whole career. And so I was working at a local church. And so I was just thinking about the kind of person I would be writing to. I was thinking about a 29-year-old student pastor at a church who he or she graduated from college with all the hopes and dreams to change the world, exactly like you're saying, and then gets into this job. And after 3 or 4 years, maybe gets married, has a kid. So there's a little bit of financial pressure. There's something kind of locking you down for sure. You got to have a job. You can't just go like rage quit because something didn't go well, right? In the creative meeting. But you got this boss, and the boss I was thinking of was like a 60-year-old boss who, wonderful person, but a little bit checked out, like kind of eyes on the finish line and kind of coasting into it, and therefore maybe not really wanting to rock the boat. And so anytime you come up with an idea or a hope or dream or thing that you want to do, they maybe kind of shoot it down, right? And you start feeling that disillusionment, or it really is kind of that discouragement that sets in where you're like, man, I wanted to change the world, and here I am trying to figure out how to, stay within this budget, this meager budget that they've given me. And so yes, that's exactly who I tried to write to when I was writing this.
Okay. Wow. Well, there we go. That worked out.
Guys,
we didn't plan this before.
No, syncing up. We're syncing up already.
And there's this balance. I feel like there's balance with anything, because before we even get into it, I feel like there's the balance of, hey, you can lead when you're not in charge, hence the title of the book. Mm-hmm. And to my generation, who's been given immediate gratification through Wi-Fi and social media and microwaves and all of that, there's also the like, do your time at the same, like I wonder if there's this balance
Yeah.
of, because I talk to HR leaders all day and they're always like, yeah, people want their pay raise and promotion after like a couple of years, and they're like, well, I worked for 10 years for this. And so I feel like there's the balance there. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of what I've been seeing. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. The way I use the word ambition a good bit in the first couple chapters, because I was trying to explain or trying to speak to what you were just referring to, which is we have all been given this thing inside of us that wants to lead, wants to move things forward. And I love the way you put it, that you might be in your first job, you might be in your 20s, and you may or may not see yourself as a leader because you maybe don't have the formal leadership position that we think, a manager of a team, direct reports, a bigger title, whatever it may be. But the reality is that you've been given this thing inside of you. I believe you were born with it. I believe it's part of just the DNA that's in you from creation. God made you, God put it in you to go and do something, to change the world, to go move something forward. Maybe not even change the world, but to change someone's world, or to change a part of the world, or to create something, organize something, build something, whatever it may be. And sometimes we don't know what to do with that ambition, because that ambition sometimes does lead us into the HR office asking for the raise.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's great. I think that's appropriate. It's there are times when you should, but what it should ultimately lead us to do is it should ultimately lead us to look in the mirror and go, how am I defining leadership, and how do I really think that I'm going to be able to get to where I want to be? Is it through a title? Is it through more power? Is it through authority? Or am I able to, whether I get the raise or not, whether I get the promotion or not, whether I have the office or not, whether I'm, out in the cube or in the corner office, am I able to build influence, cultivate influence to be able to move things forward? And so that's really the premise of the book, is that you, number one, you are a leader, whether you want to be or not. Number two, leadership is not about a title. It's not about power or authority. And so if you're just kind of waiting to get in charge, you're missing a huge opportunity. If you feel that sense of ambition, don't let it lead you to think that you need to just get a promotion or a raise. No. Figure out how to look in the mirror, Michael Jackson style. I'm talking with the man in the mirror, asking him to make a change, right? Like, what can I do? What can I do to grow in my influence? What can I do to start cultivating influence, whether I'm in charge or not? How can I cultivate influence with what I am in charge of by doing it so well that it gives me influence outside of my department or with my boss? Kind of that 360 idea all the way around me. And so that was really the whole setup of the book. And then I just here's some ideas on how to do that well. I give 4 big behaviors that everybody can begin to implement.
Okay. Have you seen, since writing the book, and I know that I'm sure you've experienced this yourself and seen it in other people even before writing the book, but since writing it, have you heard stories of people implementing some of these things? Like, hey, I didn't have a title, but I started looking around where I could influence. Like, do you have any stories?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, probably the most, the one that hit me, I don't know, for whatever reason, that was the most meaningful. There's a guy named Ben Shu. I think Ben would allow me to share the story because, he shared it in front of his whole team. But Ben Shu is an executive at Chick-fil-A. He's last time we talked, in the last maybe 6 months ago, he works in their strategic insights group. So I thought it was just interesting to hear what he does in general, but it's a group that basically they tell the restaurant, they try to just find the data that's going to tell them when they need to go double drive-through, when they need to scrape and build, when they need to build their kitchen out so that they can do more catering based on the demographics of what's around them. And Ben he brought me in to speak to his team because he was so impacted by these ideas. And it was so meaningful because he just said, look, I was in my career and I was everything you talked about at the beginning of the book. I was trying to climb. I was trying to get a bigger position. I was frustrated that my boss wasn't giving me more opportunity. I felt passed over. I didn't feel seen. And when I read this book, it really changed my mindset to go, okay, well, what am I in charge of? How can I create an oasis of excellence there? And he said, for me, it's just given me so much more fulfillment at work because I feel empowered. I feel so much more in control of what I actually am in control of and less worried about the things that I can't control, that's a big idea in and of itself. But he said it really has changed my career. And then he said, of course, not only did I start feeling happier at work, feeling more fulfillment at work, but then it actually was the thing that my bosses started seeing the change, and I started getting more opportunities. So the very thing I was trying to get, I ended up getting, but not because I was focusing on it, but because I was focusing on what I was most in charge of. And it was that was like a man. I could just see the genuine gratitude in him. I could see the change that he really was speaking to. And I think the thing that I felt most grateful about or humbled by is, when somebody's job's not going well, it's awful. I mean, it is agonizing. I don't know if, Hampton, you're young enough where you might not have been through a season like that yet. Maybe you have, but I'm sure people listening to this know what it feels like, where you just feel like I'm bumping my head against the wall. I don't like my boss. I don't like my situation. I got to get up and go every single day, and it's kind of miserable. That is an awful, awful state to be in. And so to think that in Ben's situation, that whatever ideas and concepts and whatever I was able to put out there through this book, that helped free him up to go enjoy a random Tuesday better, like that was so, it was just so meaningful. And I hope that's, the whole, like, if there were just one, it would have been worth it. It would not have been worth it if it were just Ben Shue. And so I hope that there are more stories like that, but that's certainly the first one that came to mind when you asked that.
Oh, wow. That's super cool. I heard this quote, and insert cheesy quote here, but I really like it. It's like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It's only green where you water it. And I'm hearing you talk about, what is my role right now? And like, when I have friends that reach out to me about, hey, do you think I should like go find a new job, or should I have this tough conversation? I'm like, maybe, but are you absolutely maximizing where God has you right now? I feel like, is that a lot of what you're asking people to do in the book?
Well, yeah, I do think, what does end up happening as you read it, the last couple chapters are all around how do you challenge your boss well, because what ends up happening is it does lead to the flow of the book, or the flow of the ideas lead you to the point where you're like, I guess I need to go have a harder conversation with my boss. I guess I need to go learn how to bring up that thing that's been kind of frustrating me, or creating a burden, or creating like some angst. And that, to your point, that may or may not be true. You might need to go find another job. That's another option, like you said. But yeah, I really think that's, I usually end with that idea that, hey, if that's you, if you feel like I've done everything I can do, and it's just hard and miserable and not fun, yeah, maybe you do need to quit. Maybe you do need to change jobs. If it's been 6 months, maybe not, maybe stick it out a little bit longer. But I do think learning everything you can learn where you're at, and recognizing, the simple idea of the weight room, the way the weight room works, WEIGHT, not WIAIT, the weight, like lifting weights, right? Lifetime Fitness, whatever. The way the weight room works is the weights are heavy, which makes them not always easy to lift. And that resistance builds strength. And so if you feel resistance today, and you're thinking about hitting the eject button, or rage quitting, or silently quitting, or just ghosting, whatever, just remember, no, the resistance is the strength building, that if you will put your head down and focus on what you can control. I love the term oasis of excellence, and really create that oasis of excellence. What I mean by that is, what are you in charge of? You might not be in charge of, you might be in charge of marketing, and you wish you were in charge of sales. You might be in charge of sales, and you wish you were in charge of operations. You might be in charge of one client, and you wish you were in charge of more. You might be in charge of creating the PowerPoint deck for the presentation, but you don't get to make the presentation. Fine. Whatever you are most in charge of, crush that. Make sure that is as excellent as possible, and take all the frustration that you feel toward the boss, or toward the central organization, or toward the other department. Take all that frustration and channel it toward creating an oasis of excellence. And if you can do that, I'm telling you, it is the path to get what it is that you ultimately want to get. And at some point, yeah, you may need to go, I've done that. I've created an oasis of excellence, and I'm still hitting my head against the wall, and it's still miserable, and I still hate it, and it's awful, and whatever. Okay, fine. Then, to your point, Hampton, yeah, then quit. Then go do something different. But make sure you've done everything you can do right where you're at to cultivate more influence before you just up and go, no, I definitely need more authority.
Yeah. Well, I think people naturally quit too early. And especially in my generation, when we do get a lot of that immediate gratification, it's like, have you been doing this for a few months or a few years? And have you actually been crushing it? Like, let's look at the brutal facts. Have you actually? And if so, if you
Great
do
point.
have to leave in the world that we live in today, you should be standing out compared, because I feel like the bar has never been lower. Like I think about Adam's book, The Edge, just talking about how to stand out. If you genuinely are crushing whatever it is that your role is, then you shouldn't have a problem finding some sort of other job, because I just don't think a lot of people are really crushing it like Clay might be telling you to do.
Yeah, that's probably a whole different topic of conversation, but I think you're exactly right. If you can, find one of those lists that I feel like Dave Ramsey's like classic for throwing these lists out there. Like, here are the 5 things you got to do. And it's like, show up on time, do what you say you're going to do. Don't gossip about other people, be positive, be a breath of fresh air to people. Like if you can just do some of those basic things, it is unbelievable how it will not change your life in a month, but it will, if you can execute on that and do those things on a regular basis for a sustained period of time. That is how a great career is built. And you will look back, you will be underwhelmed at what you can accomplish in a year, and you will be overwhelmed at what you can accomplish in 10 years. I really believe if you can do some of those basic things. Let me say the one that I'm trying to do right now, Hampton. I'm trying to wake up every day. This sounds so simple. I'm trying to wake up every day, write down what it is I need to do, and then do it that day.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. If you just do that for a year, do that for 5 years, do it like your dad, like do it for 30 years. Like you can do some things in your life.
Absolutely. Well, that also comes down to self-awareness too. And not to get all into the working genius listener, I talk about this a lot on here.
Yeah, let's get
but
in.
Yeah, I mean, it's like for you, tenacity, frustration, is that right?
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Okay. So I feel like the where you absolutely shine, being able to galvanize and come up with ideas and invent some of those other things, that's great. And a lot of people struggle with that, or it's frustrating. But it's interesting because I know a handful of people with tenacity as a frustration. And if you're listening, that's like checking boxes, taking things from 90% to 100, getting things done. Some people are obsessed with that, but other people, like Clay's saying, it's not an excuse to say, oh, well, I took this personality or productivity assessment, and well, it's not a genius of mine, so I don't have to do it. Right. But it's cool for you, like I know people with that as a frustration that have found a system to be able to make sure that they get things done. It sounds like that's what you're working on.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I will also say my system, part of my system is getting on ADHD medication as well. That has helped me immensely. When I signed this first book deal back in 2016 with HarperCollins, I just knew. I mean, I would go in my job. I would go a month. I'm not kidding you, a month without sitting at my desk for longer than 5-10 minutes. Like I just learned how to do my job on the move because that was what was most invigorating to me. And when I signed that deal, I was like, I am so excited about this, and I am scared to death because I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this, because the ability to focus for long periods of time, it's a muscle that you got to build. And yeah, not only has medication helped, but also learning a rhythm of waking up earlier, getting to work earlier, making myself sit down and work on sustained, difficult mental work for a longer period of time. Yeah, it is genuinely like a muscle that you can grow in. And that's one of the things I don't enjoy writing just like in general. Like I don't put it on my, list of long walks on the beach and college football and writing. Like it's not, but I really appreciate, not only do I appreciate what writing does, the ability to get ideas to people that you wouldn't otherwise get to, but secondly, I really just personally, the discipline that it has created in me to make myself sit down and form a sentence and form a paragraph and form a page and build an idea and figure out a different way to say it. It's been a really good discipline.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's a skill. I'm sure it develops you a ton. All right, I have another question. So the first time that I got to meet Clay, virtually at least, I was on him and Adam Tarno's podcast, and Adam came up with the title. It was How to Win with Old People.
Mhm.
Apparently, Clay and Adam consider themselves old, maybe compared to me. But it was one of the things I talked about on there was Tim Elmore's book Behind Me, A New Kind of Diversity, talking about like building a bridge, not a wall, between the different generations. And it was interesting as the reader, I feel like the book was mostly targeted towards, quote, older people, telling them how to, be a mentor. Like, yes, you want to be a mentor to the younger generation, but the best way to do that is to be interested in them and be an intern to them first, and then they'll trust you, and then you can mentor them. And while I love like the humility that it would take to do that, and Tim challenging older people to do that, I also think it's hilarious because I'm like, if you're my age and you're around some older, wiser people, shut up and listen. Like, and so I am teeing you up and giving you the freedom to say, like, I guess a question would be, as you assess part of the younger generation, whether it's your kids, I don't know how often you come across them in a work setting, in a church setting. I don't know, like, what are some of the themes that you're hearing? What are you seeing? Do you have a challenge for maybe how to stand out? And I don't know. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, again, this is why I wrote that book. So I would go back to those 4 big behaviors, the 4 that I throw out there on here's how I am trying to cultivate influence when I lack authority. Number 1, are you leading yourself well? I got to lead me. Are you leading yourself well? So you start there, right? Don't be frustrated with all that you can't do. Focus on what you can do. What you can do is lead yourself well. I think the best place to start in leading yourself well is growing in self-awareness, becoming, saying, hey, if I'm in my 20s, 30s, whatever, this is the season of life where I should be an expert, not obsessed with me, but I should become an expert in me. Meaning, do I know what my strengths are? Do I know the superpower that I bring to the world? And do I know what my hangups are? Do I know what my, that's one thing that's so helpful about Working Genius. It gives you your frustrations. Here's the things that people around you are not going to be surprised when you take this assessment and go, oh, that's what I don't love. They're going to be like, really? Wow. Who knew? Right? No, they know. Right. And so learning how to become more aware of that and being a person that's habitually soliciting feedback, that's not making people do that awkward dance on eggshells of like, hey, Hampton, I got something I need to say, but I just first want to tell you your hair today is just on point, like amazing. But also, next time you're in front of a client, can you not, whatever it is, smack your gum so loud? But, that awkward compliment sandwich that we make people do. No, don't make them do that. Be a person that's going and soliciting, seeking feedback, because that will put the plan together on how you can lead yourself, right? You can't get to where you want to be until you know exactly where you are. And so leading yourself starts with, do I know where I am? So that's where I would start with. So I'd say, hey, no matter your age, but particularly if you're in your 20s or 30s and you're trying to figure out how to win, start there. Start by leading yourself really, really well. Includes your habits, includes the way you're taking care of yourself, includes the way you're handling your mornings and your days. Secondly, choosing positivity. That's the attitude that you bring. Of course, we all know positivity is infectious. It's hard to choose positivity when you're not healthy, and it's hard to choose positivity when you're being handed a bunch of ideas or a bunch of decisions that have been made that you didn't get to speak into. And that's what's kind of hard about work sometimes, is you're like, well, I don't want to be positive because they're making me use this new system, and I didn't even get to weigh in on how much this system sucks. I mean, it's terrible. Like, I don't even like it. It doesn't work. Are they morons, right? That's what you're thinking. And learning how to overcome that and choose positivity in the face of doing something that you don't love doing or that you didn't get to speak into, that is not easy to do. But positivity is the greatest opportunity you have to affect the people around you by choosing to be a force for good. Anything's possible, can do, hope-filled force for good. And then thirdly, learning the skill of thinking critically. So if I'm leading me, if I'm choosing positivity, I can't be a rainbow puking unicorn just walking around going, oh, everything's awesome all the time. No, I've got to bring this skill to the table of thinking critically, which is seeing what needs to change, observing problems, pointing out opportunities to grow. And the only way to do that is to spend dedicated time thinking, right? It's the reason why the skill is called thinking critically is because it takes thought. And I would say the greatest obstacle, the greatest thief of our thoughts is our phones, right? Is technology. And so putting time on your calendar where you're thinking about how to solve some of the biggest problems that you're facing. how to improve the culture where you work, how to uh, whatever raise the way you're delighting customers or the way you're onboarding new employees, whatever you think the issue is, spending time thinking critically and bringing some ideas to the table on how to improve that. And then the last one is, the first three are things you got to do. I've got to lead myself, I've got to choose positivity, I've got to think critically, and then fourth, I got to reject passivity. So it's, when you're not in charge, it's so easy to become passive, right? And a lot of us have been there, right? We get into that position where we go, they don't care, they're not paying attention to me. If I throw out an idea, they're never listening. Nothing's going to change. The boss is going to do the swoop and poop where he comes in at the last minute and goes like, oh, yeah, that was a cool idea, but we're never doing that. No, here's what we're actually doing. You're like, cool, I just worked on that for 2 weeks, so I guess I'll just throw that in the trash, right? All of that, it creates passivity. And so learning how to reject passivity, learning how to ask some questions that dislodge passivity, like what's making your boss anxious? That should be on every one of our job descriptions. What's the magic wand answer? You know, the answer to the question, if you could wave a magic wand and this was just fixed or done or better, what would it be? That will give you some ideas on where to start to dislodge that passivity that wants to get up inside of you. And so that's what I would tell people to do. Lead yourself, choose positivity, think critically, and reject passivity. And if you can do that, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it doesn't matter. You will cultivate more influence for yourself, which will give you more opportunities than you ever wanted, more opportunities than you ever thought that you could have.
Preach. It's so good. I love that. I love the thought of it should be in your job description, what makes your boss anxious. I think a lot of people, it's, you know, we're always really good at bringing up problems, but do we bring problems with solutions, or do we just dump problems on people's desk?
Well, I'm curious, why does that stick out to you? What about that resonates with you? Why is that it's so important to figure out what your boss is anxious about?
I mean, because if you can make their life easier, that makes you more valuable for them.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
Instead of, I think like in Adam's book, he talks about how like, imagine just having like a bucket of trash and just like walking in and just like dumping it on
desk. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. And I look back and it's like, I have done that so many times because we don't know, like,
yeah, sure.
If you have like, I mean, and some of the best leaders that I've been around, when you bring up that problem to them, you know, I'm sure you said this, what would you do?
Yeah, they turn it right back around on you. Right.
What would you do? And so if you can have I think I talked to somebody, her name was Alicia. She has this acronym she calls PESO. So it's like bring the problem, then you explain the problem, and then the proposed solution, and then the outcome.
Options.
Like if you can,
outcome. There you
go. Something like that. You can go so much further than just like pointing out problems, because all that does is just like add to their plate, you know?
Peso, I like that. Yeah, I also think I would add to that. Not only does it, definitely does it. You become a value add to your boss versus a trash dumper, right? I would say in addition to that, you have to convince yourself that your boss sees things you do not see. Your boss sees from a level that you do not see from, because just the way the org chart works, your boss sees multiple departments, probably has more experience. Now, there are things you see that your boss doesn't see. That's true as well, but that's not for you to convince your boss of that. Your boss has to come to that. But you've got to convince yourself, she's anxious about things that I can't even see. And so it would be foolish of me to not know what those things are, because if I can help her solve those things, I will become more valuable and it will cultivate influence for me. And in the long run, it will make me more indispensable, right? We're all replaceable, except maybe Beyonce, but we're all, we all are, I mean, we will be replaced. But if you can make yourself as invaluable as possible, the way you do that is by solving some of those problems that are making your boss anxious. That's great.
I love that. I've also experienced that too. It's you so often, if you're not thinking like an owner and you're just on the sales team and all you think about is sales, that's understandable. You're young in your career. I've done that multiple times, but like when you can start like trying to find the capacity to zoom out and think about other departments.
I see how this sales is going to affect our IT department. I see how this is going to affect operations. Yeah, you just become a more mature, more emotionally healthy, a more indispensable leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's interesting about this podcast is I usually say on like the daily portion of it, I'll say, welcome to Wake Up Lead, where ambitious young professionals learn to lead themselves. So that's the goal of this, because I'm trying to do it myself.
That's cool.
you talked about ambition, you talked about leading yourself. And so everybody, it would be a mistake. It would be a mistake not to read Clay's book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And we just got a sneak peek of it today. So Clay, the way I like to end these, some people say it's a little bit cheesy, but I want people to wake up and lead. So I usually say it's time for you and me, and then you say to wake up and lead. Can we do that?
Oh, yeah, I'm in.
All right, sweet. All right, it's time for you and me
To wake up and lead, baby.
Yes, sir.